Hi, Jason DeSalvo from Federa Guitars back here, and we're going to continue working on setup. We're now in the end game. We're in the final piece of the puzzle. We've properly adjusted the bow in our neck, right, by setting the truss rod setting. We've properly adjusted the interstring spacing and saddle height. We've adjusted our pickup height. Now we put it all together and we intonate the instrument. Most people don't regularly intonate their bass, and we believe the easier you make the process, the more likely you are to do it every time you change your strings, which, by the way, we think you should do fairly often. Makes your frets last longer, makes your strings sound more alive. I know there are a lot of cats out there that say, I change my strings every 4 years, whether they need it or not. I tend to change my strings every couple, 3 months at most. Sometimes when I'm playing a lot, I even change them every couple of weeks. I guess the point is, every time you change your strings, you should be properly intonating your instrument. And if you're one of those people that doesn't change your strings regularly, at least once a month, every 2 months, you should be checking your intonation. And if you find that you can't properly intonate your instrument, it is time to change your strings. One of the problems with dead strings or really used strings is that you can't properly intonate the instrument. Now, it may not bother you, you may not have perfect pitch, but there's going to be someone in the audience that's going to hear you playing when you're not properly intonated, and every time you hit a note that's high on the fretboard, they're going to cringe. And if you're recording, you can go through the process that I did the first time I was in a recording studio when I was a kid, and the engineer came out and said, your bass is not in tune. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? Of course it is. You know, I showed him. He said, no. You're tuned in terms of the pitch of your open strings, but your instrument's not in tune to itself. Have you intonated the instrument? And I looked at him like he had two heads. I think I was 14. He sat me down, showed me how to intonate an instrument, and I've never forgotten it. So, very simple process. What you're doing is making sure that each string is in tune with itself. So you're going to play your open string, okay? In this case, by the way, you start by properly making sure that each string is currently in tune, right? So I'm just going to check that. We always want to, before we start doing anything in terms of setup, make sure that we're properly in tune. Okay, so we're in tune. Starting with my G, okay, I'm going to do it in the way we do it in the shop. Recognize when you play a bass, by definition, your specific hand style and fretting style are going to affect the intonation of the bass. So if I intonate your bass and you play with a much heavier touch than I do, your bass is not going to be properly intonated for you. Okay, it'll be intonated for me, but since I'm not going out on your gigs, I'm not sure how helpful that is. So this is one of those things that, yes, after you get a full setup at a shop like Federa or whatever your local shop is, you're going to want to check this yourself to make sure that your bass is intonated for you. So what I'm doing is simply going back and forth and checking that my open string and my fretted note, okay, you notice I'm fretting in the proper spot right behind the fret, okay, that they're both equally in tune. My G string is. I didn't do anything to change that, or maybe it's not. No, it's not. It's actually a little sharp. So if your fretted note is sharp compared to your open note, you're going to want to move the saddle back and flatten the note a little bit. Now, when I just said that, it sounds very complicated, but think about it. You have a string going between this point on the neck, the nut, and this point on the saddle. The longer I make that string at a given level of tension, right? I don't adjust the tension here of the string. The longer I make that string, the slower it's going to vibrate, the lower the pitch. The shorter I make that string, the faster it's going to vibrate, the higher the pitch, right? So if I move my saddle forward, I'm shortening my string and I'm increasing, if you will, the pitch of the string. So if I play an open note and my open note, as I adjust it, is perfectly in tune, okay? But then when I play my fretted note is sharp, that means I'm going to have to lengthen the string on the open note and flatten it a little bit so that when I fret here, I end up being in pitch with the open string. Sounds complicated, but it's really not, okay? My open string in this situation is perfectly in tune. When I fret at the 12th, I'm still a little bit sharp. Not as much as I was before, so I'm going to pull that saddle back ever so slightly more. Again, you always lower your pitch and then bring it back up to pitch when you retune. And I'm perfect. My G string's done, okay? Go on to my D. Now you're not going to hear this on the tape because I'm not playing through an amp. And even if I did, unless you've got exceptional pitch, you probably won't hear the difference because these are not that far out. And my D is perfect. I didn't move my D. Okay. Now my A, if you look at the way the A string saddle is, this should be a disaster. And it is. So my A string saddle needs to come way far forward. My E string, I'm sharp on my fretted note. So if I'm sharp on my fretted note, what do I have to do? I have to lengthen the string, which means I have to pull the saddle back or push it forward. Pull the saddle back. Now I'm cheating a little bit because I know what a properly intonated bridge should look like, and I'll show you that once we're done. I'm still a little bit sharp. And then once I show you that, now again, I'm tuning the string in between each adjustment. I tune the string, refret the note, now I'm perfect. Now I'm going to check to see that all the strings are properly in tune. My G is good. My D is good. Aren't you glad we're not doing a sixth string? My A is good. And my E is good. I do want to go back and check the D because it actually looks, and it is in fact, it is sharp. It looks a little sharp. By the way, each time you make a movement on the saddle, you are changing the pitch of the open string because you're pushing that, either forward or back. So that's why we actually check each time. Now I'm actually just a touch flat, so I have to come forward a little bit. So it's a process, and sometimes you can get a string that's really annoying. There will be times where you will get a string that you cannot properly intonate. And if that happens, it's a bad string, okay? Now, this is roughly what a properly intonated bridge is going to look like. If your bridge looks like a zigzag pattern, you're definitely not intonated, and/or you've got a bad string and you're trying to compensate for it with the saddle. Basically, the E string is usually the furthest back, and the G string the furthest forward, and you kind of have this slight diagonal step pattern going back, all right? I'm now intonated. Yes, we could play harmonics and intonate even more specifically. Generally, our belief is when you're playing, you're exerting different pressure on the strings all over the neck. You're pulling the strings. You never, when you're playing lines, fret perfectly, right? We don't sit there and necessarily fret exactly behind each fret. Those playing motions are going to have a far bigger impact on your intonation than going through a much more in-depth process of intonating the instrument. If your 12th fret fretted and your open string note are properly intonated to each other, you're going to be better than 98, 99% of the basses out there on the planet. It's easy, it's fast, it's something you can do once you get used to literally in 2 minutes every time you change your strings, or every month if you're a person that leaves your strings on for a long time. And then you're not going to make people in the audience that have perfect pitch cringe when you're soloing and doing your great work up in the upper register of the instrument. So that's intonating your bass. Again, like every other step, it's not rocket science. There's a lot of mystery out there. You can do this yourself. And if you do it regularly, you're automatically giving yourself a leg up at that next audition or at your next gig, because your bass is going to feel better than it's ever felt, it's going to sound better than it's ever felt, and you're going to be really confident.